In the heart of a storm-torn world, where thunder split the skies and fire raged across the mountains, one scarred warrior stood alone against an army of 100 marauders, his only allies, 2 young dragonlings and their mighty sovereign father. And as the enemy closed in with weapons blazing, the fate of an entire colony balanced on the edge of his burning resolve. A battle where every scar would become a symbol of sacrifice, and every choice would decide between survival and destruction. If you are new to the channel, then please subscribe to the channel and like the video. And tell us, where are you watching from? Now let's jump into the story. The storm had raged for 3 days over the jagged mountains of Carith 9. Thunder rolled across the sky like the beating of war drums. Lightning split the clouds, painting the mining colony below in flashes of white and violet. The workers of the colony moved quickly, their eyes often turning upward with unease. They knew the storm was not their only threat. Whispers of marauder fleets had spread through the settlement like wildfire. Into this storm walked Commander Ronan Vale. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and carried the weight of countless battles in the scars etched across his armor. His combat suit, patched and worn, told the story of a man who had survived wars across distant star systems. His face was calm, but his eyes carried the sharpness of someone who had seen too much. Ronan had come to Carith 9 for what he believed would be a simple task. He had been hired to evaluate the colony's defenses and offer advice. To him, it was supposed to be easy credits and a chance to repair his ship. The colony itself was small but vital. Beneath the rocky surface of Carith 9 lay rare crystals that could withstand extreme heat. These minerals were essential for starship construction, making the planet a target for raiders. The miners worked tirelessly, but they were not soldiers. Their tools were meant for digging, not fighting. Ronan knew this the moment he stepped into the command center. Inside, the storm's fury was muted by climate control and humming machinery. The air smelled of metal and ozone. At the center of the chamber stood a figure that made Ronan pause. Sovereign Caliph Emberborn, the Draconite guardian of Carith 9, towered nearly 9 feet tall. His scales shimmered with a golden bronze glow, streaked with crimson along his wings and spine. His eyes, molten amber, studied Ronan with the weight of centuries. Commander Vale, Caliph's voice rumbled like distant thunder. You have come at a time of great trial. Ronan inclined his head respectfully. I was told you needed help with marauders. A sound that was half growl and half laugh escaped the sovereign. Help is too small a word. What threatens us is not a raid, but a storm of blades and fire. The Ravager clan grows bold. They seek not only our minerals, but something far more precious. Before Ronan could ask, 2 smaller figures darted into the chamber. They were dragonlings, no taller than his waist. Their scales shimmered silver and gold, shifting with every movement. Their wings were small, not yet strong enough for true flight. They circled Ronan with curiosity, their eyes bright with youthful energy. Lysara, Darenth. Caliph's voice carried a note of warning. Mind your manners. The dragonlings slowed, but did not hide their interest. One of them, Lysara, stepped forward boldly and sniffed at Ronan's armor. She chirped in her native tongue, and Caliph translated with a faint smile. She says you smell of steel and fire. Ronan crouched slightly, meeting their gaze. They are young, he observed. 70 cycles, Caliph confirmed. Barely hatchlings by our measure. But the Ravagers know this. They seek to capture young Draconites for their fighting pits. The cruelty of such arenas is beyond words. Ronan's jaw tightened. He had seen those pits before, during his years in the Defense Force. He had watched innocent beings forced to fight for the amusement of others. The thought of these dragonlings in such a place filled him with quiet rage. "How many marauders are we facing?" Ronan asked. "Our scouts report nearly 100, Caliph replied. "They are led by Draxon Bloodveil, a warlord who has united scattered raider bands into something resembling an army. They carry stolen weapons of military grade. Their numbers are greater than ours, and their cruelty knows no limit." Ronan glanced at the tactical display glowing in the chamber. The colony had 40 miners with basic training, 6 security officers, and Caliph himself. The odds were grim. The dragonlings had crept closer again. Darenth, the smaller of the two, touched the plating of Ronan's boot with a tiny claw. Ronan looked down at him, surprised by the innocence in the young one's eyes. "Their mother was lost in the first raid," Caliph said quietly. "I have tried to be both parents, but the burden weighs heavy." Before Ronan could respond, the command center shook with the blare of alarms. Red lights flashed across the walls. Supervisor Merrick's voice crackled over the intercom. "Sovereign, multiple breach alerts. Marauder ships entering atmosphere. Estimated landing in 12 minutes. Caliph spread his wings wide, the span filling the chamber with shadow and light. "They come sooner than expected." His gaze fell on his children. "Lysara, Darenth, to the bunkers, now." "But father," Lysara began, her voice indignant. "Now," Caliph commanded, his tone leaving no room for argument. The dragonlings hesitated, but obeyed, retreating toward the hidden passages. Ronan was already moving, checking the charge on his rifle and pulling tactical data onto his wrist display. "How many defenders can you muster?" he asked. "Too few," Caliph admitted, "but we will stand." Ronan's eyes narrowed as he studied the incoming ships on the display. The storm outside roared louder, as if the planet itself sensed the coming battle. He had faced worse odds before, but never with so much at stake. The stranger had come to Kareth 9 for easy credits. Instead, he found himself standing at the edge of a war. The storm outside was nothing compared to the storm about to break within the colony. And Ronan Vale knew that from this moment forward, his choices would decide the fate of not only the miners, but also the future of 2 young dragonlings, whose lives had only just begun. The storm had brought him here. The stranger would now become their shield. The storm outside Kareth 9 had not eased when Commander Ronan Vale stood beside Sovereign Caliph Emberborn in the command chamber. The alarms had faded into a tense silence, but the weight of what was coming pressed down on everyone. Ronan studied the tactical display again, his eyes narrowing at the numbers. Nearly 100 marauders were closing in, and the colony had fewer than 50 defenders. The odds were brutal, and yet retreat was not an option. Ronan had fought many battles across the stars, but this one felt different. He was not only protecting miners and their livelihoods, he was protecting 2 young dragonlings whose lives had barely begun. The thought of Lysara and Darren falling into the hands of marauders filled him with a quiet fury. He had seen the fighting pits before. He had seen creatures forced to fight until death for the amusement of crowds. He would not allow that fate to touch them. Caliph stood tall, his golden bronze scales glowing faintly in the chamber light. Yet even in his strength, there was a shadow of grief. Ronan had noticed it earlier when the Sovereign spoke of the dragonling's mother. She had been lost in a raid, leaving Caliph to raise his children alone. The burden of being both father and protector weighed heavily on him. "They are all I have left," Caliph said quietly, his deep voice carrying a note of sorrow. "I have sworn to guard this colony, but my heart belongs to them. Every choice I make is for their survival." Ronan understood. He had no children of his own, but he had seen soldiers fight with desperate strength when their families were at risk. He knew that kind of determination could turn the tide of battle. Still, determination alone would not stop an army. The miners gathered in the lower levels of the command center. They were strong from years of labor, but their hands were used to tools, not weapons. Ronan walked among them, offering calm words and simple instructions. He showed them how to hold their rifles steady, how to use cover, and how to work together. His voice was steady, carrying the authority of experience. "You are not soldiers," he told them, "but you are defenders of your home. Fight with discipline, fight with courage, and you will stand longer than you think." The miners nodded, their fear tempered by his confidence. Ronan knew they would not match trained marauders in skill, but unity could give them an edge. Caliph joined him, his massive form casting long shadows across the chamber. "They will follow you," the sovereign said. "You carry the weight of command as if it were second nature." Ronan shook his head. "I carry the weight because I must. Leadership is not about choice, it is about responsibility." The dragonlings had been sent to the bunkers, but their absence was felt. Ronan could still picture Lysara's bold eyes and Darrent's cautious curiosity. They were symbols of innocence in a world scarred by war. Their presence reminded him why this fight mattered. As the storm raged outside, Ronan and Caliph reviewed the defenses. The colony had a few automated turrets, some barricades, and the determination of its people. It was not enough, but it was all they had. "Draxon Bloodveil will not stop until he has what he wants," Caliph said. "He believes strength is measured only in conquest. He will not understand the strength of guardianship." Ronan looked at him. "Then we will show him. We will show him that guardianship is heavier than greed. It is heavier than cruelty. It is the weight that makes us unbreakable." The words settled between them like an oath. Hours passed as preparations continued. The miners fortified entrances, set traps, and positioned themselves at choke points. Ronan moved among them, correcting mistakes and offering encouragement. Caliph oversaw the placement of heavy defenses, his presence alone inspiring courage. In the quiet moments, Ronan thought of his past. He remembered battles fought for governments and commanders who cared little for the lives of those they sent into war. This time was different. This time, he was fighting for something pure. He was fighting for children who deserved a future. The storm outside began to shift. The thunder grew sharper, and the ground trembled with the approach of marauder ships. The defenders felt the vibrations through the walls. Fear rippled through the colony, but Ronan's voice cut through it. "Hold steady," he said. "They are many, but they are not invincible. Remember what you fight for. Remember who you protect." Caliph stood beside him, his wings partially spread, his eyes burning with fire. "We fight for our children. We fight for our home. We fight for the bond that no marauder can break." The miners raised their weapons, their fear now tempered by resolve. The weight of guardianship pressed on every heart, but it also gave them strength. Ronan checked his rifle one last time. He knew the battle ahead would test every ounce of his endurance. He knew burns and scars awaited him, but he also knew that every wound would be worth it if the dragonlings remained safe. The storm outside roared louder, and the first shadows of marauder ships cut through the clouds. The defenders of Kareth 9 braced themselves. The weight of guardianship was heavy, but it was also unshakable. Ronan Vale stood at the front lines, ready to carry that weight into the fire. The storm over Kareth 9 grew darker as the first marauder ships broke through the clouds. Their engines roared like beasts, shaking the ground as they descended toward the mining colony. Flashes of lightning lit the sky, revealing the sharp outlines of armored vessels. The defenders of the colony braced themselves, their hearts pounding with fear and determination. Commander Ronan Vale stood at the front lines, his rifle charged and ready. Beside him towered Sovereign Caliph Emberborn, his golden bronze scales glowing faintly in the storm's light. The miners and guards took their positions behind barricades, their hands trembling as they gripped their weapons. They were not soldiers, but they were willing to fight for their home. The first wave of marauders landed with a crash of metal and fire. Armored raiders poured out, their weapons gleaming with stolen technology. They shouted war cries that echoed across the colony, their confidence fueled by numbers. Nearly 100 strong, they advanced with ruthless precision. Ronan raised his hand, signaling the defenders to hold. When the marauders crossed into range, he gave the order. The colony erupted with gunfire. Energy bolts streaked through the storm, striking the front line of raiders. Several fell, but the rest pressed forward, their armor absorbing much of the damage. Caliph unleashed his power, his wings spreading wide as he roared. Flames burst from his jaws, sweeping across the battlefield. Marauders scattered, some consumed by fire, others diving for cover. The sight of the Draconite sovereign in full fury gave the defenders a surge of courage. But the marauders were relentless. They regrouped quickly, using heavy cannons to blast apart barricades. Explosions shook the colony, sending debris flying. Miners scrambled to reload, their fear rising as the enemy pushed closer. Ronan moved among them, shouting orders, steadying their aim, and reminding them to fight together. The battle raged through the storm. Lightning flashed overhead, thunder rolled, and the clash of steel and fire filled the air. Ronan fought at the front, his rifle cutting down marauders with precise shots. Burns spread across his armor as enemy fire struck him, but he refused to fall back. Every step he took was a shield for the miners behind him. Caliph fought like a living inferno. His claws tore through armored raiders, his tail sweeping aside groups of enemies at once. Yet even his strength was tested. The marauders had come prepared, wielding weapons designed to pierce Draconite scales. Blasts of energy struck him, leaving scorched marks across his body. Still, he stood tall, refusing to yield. Hidden deep in the bunkers, Lysara and Darenth felt the tremors of battle. Though ordered to stay hidden, their young hearts burned with the desire to help. They whispered to each other, their small wings trembling with fear and courage. Though they were only hatchlings, they understood that their father and Ronan were fighting for their lives. On the battlefield, the defenders began to falter. The marauders' numbers pressed harder, their leader's presence driving them forward. Draxon Bloodvel, towering above his warriors, stepped into the fray. His armor was blackened steel, his face marked with scars of countless battles. In his hands, he carried a massive plasma axe that glowed with deadly energy. Ronan Vale, Draxon's voice thundered across the battlefield. Your defiance ends here. Ronan met his gaze, his body aching from burns and wounds. Yet his spirit did not waver. He stepped forward, raising his rifle before slinging it aside. This fight would not be won with distance. It would be decided in the clash of strength and will. The two warriors collided in a storm of sparks and fire. Draxon swung his plasma axe with brutal force, each strike shaking the ground. Ronan dodged and countered, his blade flashing in the stormlight. The duel became the center of the battlefield, both armies pausing to watch as their leaders fought. Caliph roared, holding back waves of marauders to give Ronan space. The miners, inspired by the sight, rallied once more. They fired with renewed determination, pushing back the raiders who had begun to falter. The storm itself seemed to echo their defiance, lightning striking dangerously close to the battlefield. Ronan's body screamed with pain, but his mind was clear. Every strike he made was for the colony. Every block he held was for the dragonlings. Every step he took was for the promise that innocence would not be lost to cruelty. Draxen pressed harder, his strength overwhelming, but Ronan refused to yield. The siege of Carith 9 burned on, the colony caught between fire and storm. Defenders fought with desperation, marauders with greed, and at the heart of it stood one man and one sovereign, carrying the weight of guardianship against impossible odds. As the battle reached its peak, the outcome hung in the balance. The colony's wall shook, the storm roared louder, and the clash between Ronan and Draxen blazed like fire against steel. The fate of Carith 9, the miners, and the dragonlings rested on the edge of every strike. The siege was not yet decided, but one truth was clear. Courage had become the shield of Carith 9, and no storm, no marauder, and no warlord could break it without paying the highest price. The storm over Carith 9 reached its peak as the battle raged on. Thunder rolled across the mountains, while fire and smoke filled the air. The colony shook under the weight of explosions, and the cries of both defenders and marauders echoed through the storm. At the center of it all stood Commander Ronan Vale, locked in a brutal duel with Draxen Bloodveil. Draxen swung his plasma axe with savage force, each strike powerful enough to shatter stone. Ronan met him with skill and determination, his blade flashing in the stormlight. Sparks flew as steel clashed against energy, and the ground trembled beneath their feet. The marauders cheered for their leader, while the miners and guards held their breath, praying for Ronan to endure. Caliph Emberborn fought nearby, his massive wings spread wide as he unleashed torrents of fire. His claws tore through armored raiders, his tail sweeping aside groups of enemies. Yet even as he fought, his eyes never strayed far from Ronan. He knew the outcome of this duel would decide the fate of Carith 9. Ronan's body burned with pain. His armor was scorched, his arms heavy, and his breath ragged. But his spirit held firm. Every strike he made was for the miners who had trusted him. Every block he held was for Calith's children, Lasara and Darenth, hidden deep in the bunkers. He carried the weight of guardianship, and he refused to let it break him. Draxen pressed harder, his strength overwhelming. He laughed as he swung his axe, confident that victory was near. "You cannot stand against me," he roared. "This colony will burn, and the dragonlings will be mine." Ronan's eyes narrowed. He thought of the dragonlings' innocent faces, their curiosity and their courage. He thought of Calith's grief and determination. He thought of the miners who had taken up arms despite their fear. With a final surge of strength, he stepped inside Draxen's swing and drove his blade deep into the warlord's chest. The battlefield fell silent for a moment. Draxen staggered, his eyes wide with shock. The plasma axe slipped from his hands and fell to the ground. With a final gasp, the warlord collapsed, his reign of terror ending in the storm. The marauders froze, their leader was gone, and their will to fight crumbled. Calith roared, his voice carrying across the battlefield like thunder. "Leave this place or be consumed by fire." The raiders broke, retreating into the storm. Their ships lifting off in chaos. The siege of Carith 9 was over. Ronan fell to one knee, his body trembling with exhaustion. Burns covered his armor, and blood stained his hands. Yet he remained upright, his eyes fixed on the retreating enemy. He had endured, and the colony still stood. Caliph approached, his massive form casting a shadow over Ronan. The sovereign's scales glowed faintly, his body marked by wounds, but his spirit unbroken. He lowered his head in respect. "Commander Vale," he said, his deep voice filled with emotion. "You have given more than we could ever ask. Your courage has saved not only this colony, but my children. For that, my gratitude burns brighter than fire." Ronan forced himself to stand. "I did what had to be done," he replied simply. "They deserve a future. You deserve peace." The dragonlings rushed from the bunkers, their small wings fluttering as they ran to their father. Lysara pressed against Caliph's leg, while Darenf looked up at Ronan with wide eyes. "You fought for us," the young one said softly. Ronan crouched, his tired eyes meeting theirs. "I fought for all of you," he said. "Your lives are worth every scar." The miners gathered, their faces filled with awe and relief. They cheered for Ronan and Caliph, their voices rising above the storm. For the first time in days, hope filled the colony. In the days that followed, Ronan did not leave. Though his wounds ached, he stayed to help rebuild the defenses and teach the miners how to fight with discipline. He walked among them, not as a stranger, but as one of their own. The dragonlings followed him often, their laughter a reminder of why the battle had been worth every sacrifice. Caliph stood beside him during the rebuilding, his gratitude never fading. One evening, as the storm finally cleared and the sky revealed its stars, the sovereign placed a clawed hand on Ronan's shoulder. "You are no longer just a protector," he said. "You are brother of flame, bound to us by courage and sacrifice." Ronan looked at the stars, his heart heavy, yet at peace. He had come to Kareth 9 for easy credits, but he had found something greater. He had found purpose, family, and a bond that would outlast the scars of war. The fire of gratitude burned brighter than the storm. It was not the fire of destruction, but the fire of hope, the fire of loyalty, and the fire of a promise kept. Kareth 9 would remember the siege, but more than that, it would remember the man who stood against impossible odds and chose to fight for others. And so the story of Ronan Vale and the Sovereign of Kareth 9 became more than a tale of battle. It became a legacy of courage, sacrifice, and the unbreakable bond between a warrior, a father, and two dragonlings whose future now shone brighter than the stars.